one of the key things that I would say is that at the end of it, does this matter? And with this AI software approach, Moderna was able to actually take the DNA once it was published by the Chinese. They were able to design a vaccine in 48 hours. And since they were a vertically integrated company, they could go from design to chemistry in their labs.
Welcome to the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast, where we delve deep into the life sciences industry and uncover effective strategies, innovations, and future trends. Your host, Axtria's Jasmeet Soni, engages highly acclaimed leaders in discussions focused on directing commercial success in the life sciences industry. Whether you're transforming your commercial success strategy or just craving dynamic discussion, this is the show for you.
Hello everyone, I'm your host Jasmeet Soni and welcome to the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast, brought to you by Axtria. Our goal with this show is to bring to you effective strategies, innovations, and most importantly, people who are driving improved business and patient outcomes within the life sciences industry. Our guest today is Jesse Chadha. Jesse really needs no introduction. If you are in the life sciences industry or in the data and analytics fields, you have likely heard of him. He's an entrepreneur, a highly regarded data scientist, and an influential thought leader in the rapidly evolving data analytics and artificial intelligence fields. He currently serves as the president and CEO of Axtria, which is one of the life sciences industry's most prominent global players. Before Axtria, Jesse was the co-founder and CEO of MarketRx. Jesse has been featured in some of the most aspirational lists, including E&Y Entrepreneur of the Year, PharmaWise 100, Inc. 500, Deloitte Fast 50, NJBiz, Smart CEO, Red Herring, and the list goes on and on and on. Jesse, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Jasmeet, great to be here. Thanks for that wonderful introduction.
Deserve all those accolades that you have received over the years. Jesse, the title for today's discussion is the biggest comparative advantage in 2025. But before we look into the future and the challenges that lie ahead of us, it's important to look back and understand how we got here. Can you help us understand the disruptions in the past 2 decades and what were the primary drivers of those disruptions?
So, Jasmeet, as you know, there is a lot that has happened in the world since 2000. Many of that has to do with technology and the technology disruption. If you remember, in 2000, the cloud did not exist. There was a lot of focus on Y2K and software and automation. But the software were not very intelligent. And depending upon how you count, if you look at just the list of Fortune 500 companies, and you look at the companies that were there on that list in 2000, more than 50% of those companies are not on that list again. And by the same measures, if you forecast and look ahead, half of the current S&P 500 companies will be replaced in the next decade.
Wow.
So, when you look at that average tenure of the companies of the S&P, it will be down to 12 years in 2027, down for 24 years, just 5 years ago, which was 24 years, right? So what that signifies is that the pace of innovation, the pace of disruption, the pace of change is accelerating. And life science industry is not immune to this. Digital and the technology are the key drivers of this disruption. And data and software has played a role, but it is just beginning that the data and software led transformation is going to change and disrupt the industry as we know it.
Wow. Good that you mentioned data and software, but interesting that you say that it's just the beginning. Jesse, why is that? Are you suggesting that going forward, data and artificial intelligence and software are going to be the primary drivers of disruption in the future?
Yes, Jasmeet. In the next stage of disruption, the disruption will be driven by data, AI, and software. So if you look at the companies that will thrive and the companies that will struggle, it will be decided based on how well they are able to capture data, process it, drive insights using AI and software. When you look at the importance of decision accuracy, of decision velocity, they will become the biggest competitive advantage in the future. And we have a strong belief that only the companies that lead with the and analytics will remain relevant after 2025. And the companies that are currently, and most of the companies are not on track to get there, by the way. So that is the primary reason why the disruption is going to accelerate. Every business must be run as a digital business, and data and software are the foundation of that digital business. And then, if you look at some of the statistics of what has happened in the previous 5 years, the world will create 3 times more data in the next 5 years. 70% of all critical data will be outside of the four walls of the company by 2025. Over 100 billion sensor devices will be there collecting data by 2025, and 80% of that data will be unstructured by 2025. And that is the reason why we believe that the companies are simply not ready for this.
Yeah, and those are some mind boggling numbers. If you think about how the transformation has been taking place, but where this is going to go in the future, it's totally going to be a different world. As you talked about the 100 billion sensors and 80% of data sitting outside, companies are likely not ready for that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about how all this impacts the business within the life sciences industry. As we all know, the business needs and business models are evolving. But why does the transformation need to focus on data and software and the AI aspect of it, or as you call it, intelligent systems? Do you think it's a must?
Absolutely, Jasmeet. So the pace of digital transformation is only accelerating. We firmly believe that the pharma and the life sciences company will do more in the next 10 years than they have done in the past 100 years. And as you know, life sciences industry has been one of the most innovative industries in the world. The new business models will replace the existing ones. So when you look at the various areas where how drug development is happening and how the software is automating that drug development process, when you look at it, that the pharma companies who are developing these very innovative drugs and therapies, they need to find the right patient. So when you think of it, how do you deliver these therapies to the patients? The impact of the data that is being collected post approval of the products, which is known as real world evidence, the actual data of the patients who receive these therapies, and how does that inform our decisions, is going to become very important. And as the most important things are going to be, at the end of it, driving the patient outcomes. We think that it will be impossible to compete without the data and software driven transformation. When you look at some of the things that are happening, which is going in the evolution of the industry, and many of these things have been around for some time, but now there is even a more acute awareness in our industry. So whether you look at the precision or custom medicine designed for the patient, where you're talking about the patient N of one, you look at curative therapies, which are the digital therapies, whether it's patient monitoring, engagement, therapy adjustments, and adjustments based on the patient journey and lifestyle. When you look at the impact of AI driven R&D and clinical on drug development and discovery, you look at the interventions, the precision interventions and tissue engineering, there is so much that is changing. You can look into patient experiences. How do you deliver patient experiences when the population size is down to one? This is where we used to talk about specialty markets. Now they are hyper specialty markets, especially when you go towards rare diseases and really understanding from the genetics of the patient and recognizing that each patient is unique and different, and hence their therapy should be different. And one thing that in the last couple of years has become even the world has become more aware is basically talking about the healthcare equity, the therapies delivered where the healthcare ecosystems, where the manufacturer, the provider, the payer, the pharmacies, the patients, all of them are recognized as one ecosystem. So it's not disparate systems. They're not, competing or working in silos, but it's kind of one integrated systems. And of course, we also have to look at this world in a global manner, not just from a US centric perspective. And when you start thinking about this, the world population of 7 billion people, also the access and equity and affordability starts coming into the picture as well. So there is a lot that is changing in the world today.
Those are some amazing insights. I love how you break it down and make it sound so simple. But as we talk about all this transformation and future readiness, it's easy for some to just dismiss it as something that's not relevant today, or see it as futuristic. Is there any digital transformation case study that you can talk about that makes it real for the pharma executives today?
Jasmeet, actually, there are so many things happening, but as we are having this conversation, we are in the kind of we're living in the COVID world, and the two companies that the world had never heard of before COVID happened, or most of the people in the world had not heard about, was Moderna and BioNTech. When you look at Moderna, it's fascinating, what this company is. The company actually publicly states, it's a public company. They talk about it that we're a technology company that does biology. And now, if you think about it, if you look at the transformation of the life sciences, the pharma industry, and the healthcare over the last 100 years, it actually, pharma used to be driven mostly with chemistry. This is how the lot of old drugs got discovered, right? And then it basically changed from chemistry to biology. And what Moderna is doing is that it's actually going from chemistry to biology to software. And obviously, they have actually picked an approach, whether it is in terms of cure or diagnosis, to use the genetic methods and they're using mRNA for that. So for a company like Moderna, the digitization was important from day one. And by the way, unlike a lot of different pharma company CEOs, the Moderna CEO is actually an engineer by training, a chemical engineer actually, and who understands technology. And Moderna knew early on that the unintegrated data and systems can cause huge problems. So the CEO knew how important it was to get digitization right from the beginning, because it becomes very difficult or almost impossible later. Business process engineering was key, but digitizing a crappy analog process results in no good, as we all know it. So at Moderna, the automation followed once the digitization was complete, and the automation reduced cycle times and allowed Moderna to outpace large pharma. So when you look at the outcomes that they have been able to deliver in the race to find a vaccination for COVID, Moderna is an overnight success, except for they've been at it for many, many years. And if you look under the hood, actually it's software and AI that is Moderna's biggest competitive advantage. And to be an AI company, you need the sponsorship at the highest level. The founders of Moderna, the CEO, and the investors actually recognized that software and AI was going to be the key to building these new drugs and systems in this world. So what they did is that they digitized their operations. They promoted a digital culture. They actually have an AI factory with layered multi-state logic built in their ecosystem. And when they got started, some of the key things that Moderna focused on was that they were operating in cloud from day one. And that was the key, by the way. Integration was key, no siloed system, all lab equipment connected via IoT. And what's more important is having sophisticated digital tools or algorithms that are integrated at all levels. And the way the things come together is what matters about technology and not the technology itself, right?
Yep. Yep.
So what they did is they invested in automation and robotics first for islands of automation and then broader automation as a whole. And they knew that if they automated too much or too early, it might be dangerous, it may not work. But when you look at it as the whole system, and as this whole system came together and became connected using analytics and AI, the digitization was being done not just for the sake of digitization, but for generating data. And every time you run an experiment and research, you get more data that is structured. And that is what they were using to help build their algorithms.
Wow, that's fascinating to hear how COVID vaccine was developed, and how technology actually helped. And it's not just an eye opener for the life sciences world. I would say it's an eye opener for every industry in terms of the possibilities of true digital transformation. And I would also like to get your thoughts on the recent Pfizer-Israel deal, because that's very interesting. It's being termed as vaccine for data deal, but I think there's more to it. So what are some key takeaways from that deal that you can share with us?
So Jasmeet, this is actually a live case study of what is known as real world evidence. So, we all know that, Israel is a very progressive and a very modern state. But when you look at from the lens of the pharma and the healthcare industry, it's a very unique country. It has it's a small population, but it is highly connected and automated. Every citizen is part of one of the 4 HMOs, and all the systems are connected. So when a patient goes to a healthcare provider or hospital, they actually have the history of every citizen going back as many as 30 years. So they have all the data on the citizens. What Israel did was that, there was a lot of kind of this state policy or state politics that was happening to get access to the COVID vaccines. And what Israel did was that they actually approached Pfizer and they offered Pfizer real world evidence or data on the patients who were going to get vaccinated with the Pfizer vaccine. And what they asked for was that they get a preferential allotment of vaccines so that they can actually vaccinate faster and more of the citizens than the rest of the world to build the herd immunity. And in return, what Pfizer was going to get was on a completely private, with privacy and anonymized and all of that, but for get the actual healthcare data of the citizens so that they actually could know things that they could never find out in running an actual clinical trial. So, for example, people who received vaccine, if they had other comorbidities, and they could look at all the history. So, it was very well known upfront that people who had diabetes or were obese or had hypertension were getting impacted by COVID virus more than the other people. But they could actually look at all comorbidities, look at all age groups, all lifestyles, all of that for the whole population. So it's a very, very rich data that would actually help you track and understand how the COVID vaccine was working, what were the side effects, what were some of the early warning systems that would come out of it, which you could not have caught in a clinical trial or could not have caught if you were not tracking every patient after they received the COVID vaccine. And this was truly a win-win where Pfizer got the trove of data that Israel provided, and Israel got a preferential allotment of vaccine that they could actually vaccinate more of the population faster than any other country in the world. And that is where this world is headed, where the data around patients is going to be so valuable that is going to drive the key decisions in the pharma and the life science industry as to how their drugs and their devices get used by the population and how it drives patient outcomes.
Absolutely. And that also brings them closer to the patient as well as they collect more and more data. That's amazing, Jesse. Thanks for these insights. I would actually like to summarize our discussion today. And I'm pretty sure, we're going to have a series of these episodes around digital transformation, but I would like to summarize our discussion for today so the audience has some key takeaways. So what I understand is, one, you talked about why AI and software aspect of digital transformation is so critical. Companies must lead with artificial intelligence to be relevant in 2025 and beyond, when volume, variety, and velocity of data will be very different. Decision accuracy, as you said, and decision velocity will become the biggest competitive advantage. Two, you described how the business and monetization models are rapidly evolving in the life sciences industry, and success in these new models will be entirely dependent on organizations' data and software acumen, the two things that will lead to true digital transformation in the future. And three, you talked about Moderna's digital-first approach and the fact that they operate as a technology company that does biology has been the key enabler for their rapid vaccine development. On the other hand, Pfizer-Israel deal indicates the growing importance of access to data for the life sciences companies. Is there anything else you would like to add to this summary?
So one thing, Jasmeet, one of the key things that I would say is that at the end of it, does this matter? And with this AI software approach, Moderna was able to actually take the DNA once it was published by the Chinese. They were able to design a vaccine in 48 hours. And since they were a vertically integrated company, they could go from design to chemistry in their labs. And remember, we talked about it, that all their machines and all their systems are interconnected. They were able to actually develop the vaccine and file for an FDA approval in 2 months. In the history of pharma and life sciences, this has never happened before. People design drugs and vaccines. In over years, they develop them and file for approvals over a very long period of time. That's the power of AI and software and digital platforms, that they were able to actually solve a very, very tough disease from a vaccination perspective and file for an approval, which obviously got approved. And we all know how effective it is. As they say, the rest is history. It's hard to imagine all of that was done in 2 months.
That's just amazing. That's just unheard of, and not possible without the transformation that we're talking about. Jesse, this has been an extremely insightful conversation, and I'm sure our audience will be able to take away some of these learnings and apply them to their business as they prepare for the future. Thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing your knowledge and deep experience in this space.
You're welcome, Jasmeet. It's been a pleasure.
To the audience, thank you so much for joining us today, and tune in soon for the next episode.
Thanks for joining us on the Life Sciences Leadership Podcast. If you loved this episode, please share with friends and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. For more information, visit lifesciencespodcast.com. Until next time.